Hey, what's going on, developers? Welcome back to the Next.js full course with a full stack real estate application. In this video, we are going to integrate the Stripe API for receiving online payment in our application. So this is the final version of the application. We can go to the user profile page, and here we can click on purchase your subscription. Here we can choose between these plans. For example, if I click on the buy now here, you can see a payment panel is open. We can enter our card information and click on the pay here to make an online payment. So in this video, first we are going to create this subscription page, and then I'm going to teach you how you can integrate the Stripe API for receiving online payment in your Next.js application. So I think that's it, enough with the introduction, and without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, so I open up our project, and before moving forward, if you want to watch the previous episode of this tutorial, I put the link to all episodes of this tutorial in the description below. Also, you can click on the card here to see the full playlist of this tutorial. Okay, so in the first step, we need to create a subscription section in the user profile. So inside the app directory, I'm going to go to the user directory and then open up the page inside the profile directory. So this is the user profile page, and if I go back to the browser, you can see this is the user profile page. Now we are going to add a subscription section after the basic information section. So I get back to VS Code, and here I'm going to add another card for user subscription section, and inside it we are going to add a section title, and we need to set the title props to subscription details. Okay, let's get back to the browser. This is the subscription details section. Now let's get back to the VS Code, and here let's put some class name, and let's scroll up to the first card and just copy the class names here and paste them here inside the second card. Okay, let's get back to the browser. They are vertically aligned with each other. So let's get back to the VS Code, and here in this card, first we need to render the purchased subscriptions of the user. So since we haven't created the subscriptions model in our database, we can't access to the user subscription for now. Hence we are going to put it to do here, and I'm going to say put user subscription here. Okay, so after we have implemented the user subscription table in our database, we can access them by Prisma and render them here. But for now, we are going to just create a link here. I'm going to set the href to /user/subscription. We haven't created this route. We are going to create it in a minute. But for now, let's put a button inside this link. Okay, you can just go ahead with a normal text caption. But since the button component is a pre-styled button, we just put a button component inside the link caption. So here, I'm going to name it purchase your subscription. Okay, and then set the color to secondary, and let's save this, get back to the browser. You can see we have the purchase your subscription button here. If I click on that, we are headed to a 404 page because we haven't created this page yet. So now in this section, we are going to create this page. Get back to the VS Code, and here inside the user directory, we're going to create another directory. I'm going to call it subscription, and then inside it, we're going to create the page.tsx. Okay, now let's create a component here. We're going to call it subscription page. Okay, and then inside this page, we are going to retrieve the subscription plans from our database and then render them inside this page so the user can choose to buy one of them. Okay, but here we haven't created the subscription panel in our database. So now we need to go to the Prisma schema. Okay, I open up the Prisma directory and go to the Prisma schema, and here we are going to create a subscription plan in our schema. So I'm going to say model and call it subscription plan, and then here first we're going to add an ID field. Its type is going to be int. We're going to set it to ID decorator, which means that it is going to be the primary key of the table, and we're going to set the default decorator, and inside it we're going to call the auto increment function. So now this is an auto increment ID field in our subscription plan table. Then we're going to add a name field, which is going to be a string, a price field, which is going to be a float number, and also a property limit, which is the maximum number of properties that user can post on the current plan. Okay, we need to set its type to int. Also, we're going to have an image per property limit. We're going to set its type to int as well. And also we're going to have a features field in which we can actually store other features of the current subscription plan. So we're just going to set its type to string. Okay, now let's quickly go to our database diagram and add this model inside it. Okay, now we are on the diagram tool, and here let's add another table. So let's open up the editor here. We're going to have a subscription plan model, subscription plan. We're going to have an ID inside it, which is going to be int. So let's find the subscription plan here. Let's zoom in. We have the ID inside it, name, which is going to be a string, price, which is going to be a float, property limit, which is going to be int again, images per property limit, and also features, which is going to be int. And lastly, we need to add the features, which is going to be string. Okay, so let's save this, and later we are going to add another model, which is the subscription plan, in which we're going to store the purchase subscription plans of the user with their online payment information. So for now, we're done with the diagram, and now we are going to add some subscription plan data inside the subscription plan table in our database, so we can fetch them in the /user subscription page and render them inside the page. So I'm going to do that with the Prisma Studio and manually put the data inside it. Okay, so I get back to VS Code. Here, open up the terminal. I'm going to say npx Prisma Studio. And here I'm going to go to the subscription plan here. And as I said, I'm going to just manually put the data inside this table. So I pause the video and add the data inside this table. Okay, I added 3 plans in this table: basic, premium, and standard. And I filled the data about the other fields of this table. So now we can go to the subscription page and fetch these plans and render them inside the page. Back to the VS Code here. In the subscription page, first we are going to fetch all the subscription plans from our database. So we're going to use the Prisma here. First we need to set this component as an async component. Okay, and then here we are going to create a promise for fetching the subscription plans. I'm going to say const subscription plans, and then call the Prisma client that subscription plan that find many. So since we need to fetch all the subscription plans, we're going to just call the find many function without any configuration object. So as you might notice here, we didn't use the await keyword here before the Prisma client. That's because we don't want to resolve this query right away. We're going to resolve it in a promise.all function. So in the next line, we're going to define a list here and then set it to promise.all function. First, we need to use the await keyword, then promise.all, and then we are going to pass another list to the all function and pass the subscription plans here. So let me just rename these subscription plans to subscription plans promise, because this is a promise. Okay, now here we can get the subscription plans in the returning list of the promise.all function. So what's the point of using the promise.all function if we have only one promise, you might be asking? That's because later we are going to add another promise to this promise.all function, and that's because we have used the promise.all here. Okay, now that we have the subscription plans, we need to render them here in the main div of this component. In order to do that, I prefer to create a separate component for the subscription plan. So inside this file, we're going to create another component. I'm going to say const plan and set it to a functional component. And here for the props of the component, we're going to create an inline interface. It takes the plan as the props, which its type is going to be subscription plan from the Prisma client. Okay, now we can access to the plan here, and here inside it we're going to return the JSX. I'm going to return a div here, and inside the div we're going to set the class name. We're going to have a border, rounded corners, and also a shadow. Then we're going to use the flex here and flex cool. So now we can use the gap here, gap 5, and also justify between, because we are going to spread the elements inside this div from top all the way to the bottom. And lastly, we're going to have a P5 for padding. Okay, now inside the div, we're going to render the name of the plan. I'm going to use an h1 for that, and inside it, we're going to render plan that name. Okay, we need to style this h1. We're going to use the text XL for the text size, font bold, also text primary 500 and text center. Okay, so that is for the name of the plan. So let's close the Explorer here. And after that, we are going to render the price of the plan. So we're going to use another h1. Inside it, we are going to render plan.price.toString. Now we need to style this h1 element. We're going to set the class name here, and we're going to say text2xl, and for LG screen we're going to use text5xl. For the text color we're going to use text orange 600 and also font bold. Okay, so that is for the plan's price, and after that we are going to put a horizontal line here, so I'm going to use an HR element, and now we are going to render the features of the plan. So here, since the features are stored in our database as a string but is separated with comma, so we can split the features and then put each feature on a separate line. So I'm going to create a div here. We're going to set the class name flex and also flex cool, because we are going to render each feature on a new line and a gap 1. Inside the div we are going to split the features by comma. So here I'm going to say plan.features and then use the split function and pass the comma. So now each feature is a separate string. The split function return them in an array. So we can map through this array. We're going to get the feature, and then for each feature we're going to render a p tag, and inside the p tag we are going to render the feature dot trim function. Okay, so the trim function actually remove the space from the beginning and the end of the feature string. Now let's put some class name for each feature. We're going to say text slate 500 and also text SM for the text size. Okay, now let's get back to the browser. We haven't used the plan component in the subscription page component. So let's get back to the VS Code, and here I go to the subscription page. Here we need to map through the subscription plans. And then for each item inside it, we're going to render a plan component and set the plan props to item. Okay, now we need to put a class name here. We're going to use grid system. Grid equals 1 for small size screens, and for large screens we're going to have 3 columns. So I'm going to say grid equals 3 and a gap of 5 between each column. Let's fix the typo of the gap, and we're done here. Also we need to put a page title component, so we put another div here and wrap the existing div inside this new div. Now we can put a page title component and set the title to subscription plans. Okay, now let's get back to the browser. You can see here we have the basic plan, standard plan, and also premium plan. So we need to put the price and also the features on the center of each plan. Get back to VS Code, and here first we are going to put a padding for the container div p4, and then I go back to the plan component, and here we're going to have a text center. Let's get back to browser. You can see now the features are on the center. We're going to do the same for the price h1 tag. Get back to VS Code, and here for the price we're going to have a text center. Okay, get back to the browser. Okay, now let's put a $sign here. So before the plan price, I'm going to put a $sign. Let's get back to the browser. Now we can see it is much better. We have the padding here, space between each column, and now we are going to put a purchase button at the bottom of each plan. So I get back to the VS Code. Inside the plan component, here after the feature div, we are going to put a purchase button. So in order to do that, I prefer to create a separate component for the purchase button, because in that button we are going to integrate the Stripe API. So that's why I'm going to create a separate component for the purchase button. So here inside the subscription directory, I'm going to create another directory. I'm going to call it _components, and inside it we're going to create a purchase plan component. So I put a .tsx after that, and now we can create a component here. Let's remove this line, and I'm going to create a type for the props of the component, type props. We can do that with a interface, but here this time we are going to use the type keyword. It is going to have a plan which its type is the subscription plan that comes from the Prisma client. Okay, inside the JSX, let's return a button element. Let's set its color to secondary, and also let's put an icon at the end of the button. So in the end content, we're going to render a shopping bag icon, and let's put the class name for that, class name, and put W4 for its width. Okay, so now let's grab the plan out of the props of the component. First, we need to set its type to the props type that we have just created and grab the plan out of it. Okay, here we can check if the price of the plan is 0. We can just return another button that actually does not require the online payment. So here we're going to say if plan.price is 0, then we are going to return another button that say try it for free. Okay, that's it for now for the purchase plan button. We're gonna get back to this button and we need to integrate the Stripe API for online payments. But for now, let's get back to the subscription plan page and render the purchase plan component here. So I'm gonna use purchase plan and pass the plan as the props to the component. Okay, now let's get back to the browser. You can see in the first one, since the price is 0, we have the try for free button, but for the other two plans, we have the purchase plan button. Let's get back to the VS Code, and in the purchase plan, let's change the caption of the purchase plan button to purchase subscription. Okay, now let's get back to the browser. So yeah, we're done with the subscription plan, and now in the next step, we are going to integrate the Stripe API for receiving the online payments. In this section, we're diving into the world of payments and exploring how to integrate this Stripe with our Next.js application. And I'm going to break it down visually with a flowchart here. That's right, a visual roadmap to the Stripe integration in Next.js. So in our diagram tool, I've already created a flowchart for Stripe integration with Next.js. In the first step, we need to install the dependencies, and then we need to configure the environment variables. In order to do that, we need to go to our Stripe account and get our API keys and then keep them inside the env file. In the next step, we are going to handle the backend side. We are going to create a server action and initialize the Stripe API there, and then we need to create a payment intent in our server action. So actually we need to do that with the Stripe API here that we have initialized, and we need to specify the information about the payment, like the amount of money that we want to receive from the customer, and also a description for the payment as well as the currency. And then the Stripe API will create a payment intent in the Stripe side, and it will return a payment intent object that contains a client secret, and then we need to use that client secret when we are going to confirm the payment. So after creating this server action for creating the payment intent, we are going to work on our front end. We will create a payment form. Actually, we will not create the payment form from scratch. We are going to use the payment form that Stripe package offers, and then we need to just handle the form submission, and inside the form submission we need to confirm the payment. So in the rest of this video, we will walk through each step in a great details, so finally you can understand how we can integrate the Stripe with your Next.js application. So without further ado, let's get into the first step. Okay, back to the VS Code. I open up the terminal and I'm going to install the Stripe packages. I'm going to say npm install. The first package that we need to install is the Stripe, and the second is add stripe /stripe-js, and the third one is add stripe /react-stripe-js. Okay, so we need to install these three packages. Okay, it's done, and I go back to the diagram. In the next step, we need to configure the environment variables. So as I said, in this section, we need to store the API keys of our Stripe account in our env file. In order to do that, I go to the stripe.com, and here we need to sign in into the stripe.com. Okay, click on the sign in here. If you don't have a Stripe account, you need to create a Stripe account first, and then you can sign in into the application application. So when we sign in into the application, as you can see, we are in the test mode. The purpose of the test mode is to simulate the payments and test your integration thoroughly before processing real money. It uses test API keys that does not involve any actual money transfer. After implementing and integrating the Stripe in our Next.js application, we need to switch to the live mode, which processes actual payment from our customers. So switching from the test mode to the live mode doesn't involve any code change in our Next.js project. We just need to change the test mode to the live mode and then copy our new live mode API keys and then paste them in our env variable. That's all. We don't need to change any code in our Next.js project. So after signing into the dashboard, I'm going to click on the developers mode and I go to the API keys here. You can see we have a publishable key here and a secret key here. So I copy the publishable key, get back to our VS Code, go to the env file. Here we need to create a variable for the publishable key. First, I'm going to create a section for Stripe. And then here I'm going to create a next public Stripe publishable key variable and paste our API key from the Stripe dashboard. And next we are going to create a Stripe secret key variable. And I go back to the Stripe dashboard and here I'm going to copy the secret key, get back to the VS Code and paste it here for the Stripe secret key. So when we are going to change to the live mode in which involve the actual money transfer, we just need to change the value of these two variables. We don't need to do anything more with our Next.js code. Okay, so let's save this and now we can go to the next step. Here in the next step, as you can see, we need to create a server action that initialize the Stripe and create a payment intent. So get back to VS Code and inside the lib directory and then actions directory, I'm going to create a new file, payment.ts, and inside this we are going to create the server action for creating the payment intent. So first we need to mark it with the use server, hence any function in this file is now a server action. Okay, now let's create our server action. I'm going to say export const create payment intent, and it is going to be a function, actually an async function that takes the amount, which actually the amount of money that we are going to receive from the customer. It is going to be a number and also a description, which is the description of the payment. Obviously it is going to be a string. Okay, inside the body of the function, first we need to create an instance from the Stripe class. So here I'm going to say const Stripe equals to new, and here we need to use the Stripe class. So it doesn't appear in the autocomplete, so let me import it manually here. Import the Stripe from the Stripe. Okay, let's get back to our server action, and here we need to pass our Stripe secret key. So I'm going to say process.env.stripe and then get back to the env file and just copy the variable key here, get back to our server action and paste it here. Okay, so in this way we can instantiate a new instance of the Stripe class. Then in the second parameter in the constructor of this class, I'm going to set the TypeScript to true and I'm going to specify the API version here, API version 2. As you can see, the autocomplete shows the value for the API version. So in this way we are creating a new instance of the Stripe class. Now we can create our payment intent. So here I'm going to say const payment intent and I'm going to call the Stripe payment intent.create function. So I'm going to use await here and then Stripe dot payment intent and then call the create function here, passing configuration object to it, and here inside it we need to specify the amount and also the description, and we need to specify the currency here, which here in this case I'm going to use the US dollar. Okay, so amount and description comes from the parameters of the function, and then we need to just set the currency here. Okay, it will actually create a payment intent in the Stripe server, and we just need to return the payment intent from this server action. We will use this payment intent in our payment form when we are going to confirm the payment. So that's it for the backend side, and now we can go ahead to the next section. Back in our flowchart diagram, you can see after the backend section, we start the front end section. And in the front end section, the first step is to create a payment form. So let's get back to the VS Code and I go to the purchase plan component. You can see we have rendered a button for purchase subscription. So we want to show a payment form or checkout form when the user clicks on this button. So here we are going to create a modal payment form, and when the user clicks on this button, we're going to show the modal payment form. So now let's create the checkout form. I prefer to create the checkout form in a separate component. So inside the components directory of the subscription directory, side by side of the purchase plan component, I'm going to create a checkout form.tsx. Then inside it, we're going to create a component. I'm going to use the modal component of the Next UI. And here we need to define an interface for the props of the component. Okay. And inside it, we're going to have a show prop, which is going to be a Boolean. It actually determines whether the modal is shown or not. Also, we need to have a set show, which is the mutation function of the show state. Okay, it takes a Boolean as the parameter and it returns nothing. I forgot to put a colon after the set show. Okay, now we can access to the props of the component. I'm going to define a props object and set its type to the props interface. Here in the modal, we're going to set the isOpen state to props.show. Actually, we are controlling the show state of the modal outside of the component. So here inside the modal, for now, let's add a modal content. Okay, and inside it, we're going to have a modal header. In the modal header, let's say complete your subscription purchase. Okay, now after the modal header, we're going to have a modal body. Inside the modal body, we're going to put a form element, and inside this form, actually we are going to put the payment element that is offered by the React Stripe. So as I mentioned before, we don't need to create the payment elements from scratch. We just use the components that are offered by the React Stripe. For now, we don't want to put the payment element, so let's add a to-do here, put payment element. We're going to get back and put it here later in this video, but for now, let's add the buttons of the form. We're going to have a div here, set class name flex, because we are going to put two buttons side by side, and we're going to have justify center. Okay, inside this div, we're going to render two buttons. So I just copy the second button. The first one is going to be cancel button, and the second one is going to be pay button. So we need to set the type of this button to submit because it is on a form element. Later in this section, we are going back and handle the form submission of this form. But for now, let's style these two buttons. The pay button, we're going to set its color to primary, and for the cancel button, we're going to set the color to danger and its variant to light. Okay, so that's it for now for the checkout form. We will get back here. We need to put the payment elements here and also write a function for the confirm payment. But for now, let's get back to the purchase element, which actually is the parent component of the checkout form. We need to define a state here for keeping the show state of the checkout form. So first, I'm going to define a state here with useState, show checkout, and set show checkout. We're going to set it to useState and set its default value to false. So we're going to wrap the whole component with a React fragment. And after the button, we're going to render our checkout form. We need to set the show to the show checkout and set show to the set show checkout. And here we need to create a function for on-click event of this button. So after the use state here, I'm going to define a function const. We're going to call it initiate payment, and let's set it to a function that inside it, for now, we just set the show checkout to true. Actually, in this function, first we need to create a payment intent with our create payment server action. But for now, let's just set the show checkout to true here. We'll get back and handle creation of the payment intent. So let's set the on-click event of the button to initiate payment. Okay, let's save this and let's get back to the browser. So here, as you can see, we are on the subscription page, and if I click on the purchase subscription, you can see a modal form is shown, and we have two buttons here, cancel and pay. So if I click on the cancel, it doesn't actually close the modal component. So let's get back to the browser and I go to the checkout form, and here inside the cancel button, we're going to set the onClick event to a callback, and inside the callback, we're going to call the props.setShow and pass false to it. Okay, and here let's put a gap between these two elements, gap 4 for example. Let's get back to the browser. If I click on the cancel, you can see the checkout form is closed now. Okay, so now we need to put the payment element in our checkout form. So let's get back to the VS Code and put the payment element in our checkout form. Inside the checkout form, you can see we have a to-do here, put payment element. So here inside the form, I'm going to use payment element, which comes from the React Stripe here. And then let's save that, get back to the browser. If I click on the purchase subscription, you can see it gives me an error, and the error says that the payment element must be wrapped inside a elements provider. So what is the elements provider? It's a Stripe component that is kind of like a context provider that shares the payment information for other Stripe component like payment element. So for the payment element, in order to be able to have access to the payment information, it needs to be rendered inside a elements provider in the components tree. So we need to actually wrap the payment element with a elements provider. So I get back to the VS Code, and here, as you can see, the payment element is inside the checkout form, and our checkout form is inside the purchase plan. So here I'm going to wrap the checkout form with a elements provider that comes from the @Stripe React Stripe.js. Okay, so just wrap it inside the elements. So as you can see, we have an error here, and that's because we need to initialize two props here, Stripe and options. So in order to initialize the Stripe prop here, we need to create a Stripe promise with the load Stripe function. Okay, so I go outside of the component, and here I'm going to say const Stripe promise and set it to load Stripe function that comes from the @Stripe/Stripe.js. Okay, here we need to pass the next public key. So since it is saved in our env file, I'm going to use the process.env and then pass the name of the variable, which is the next public Stripe publishable key. And I put a exclamation mark here to assert that it is not going to be undefined. Okay, now we can pass the Stripe promise here to the Stripe prop of the elements provider. The other prop that we need to initialize here is the options. We need to set it to an object, and inside the object we need to set the client secret. So what is the client secret? The client secret is actually the client secret inside the payment intent object. So we have a typo here. Let's fix that. Payment intent. Okay, now the client secret is inside this payment object. So we need to call this create payment intent function in our purchase plan component and get back the payment intent. And from this returning object, we need to grab the client secret. So let's save this and get back here inside the initiate payment function, which is set to the onClick event of the purchase subscription button. We need to create a payment intent. So first we need to set it to an async function. Okay, and here inside it we can call the create payment server action await create payment intent, and then here we need to pass two parameters, the amount, which is the plan dot price, and since the price needs to be in cents unit, we need to multiply that by 100. Then in the second parameter, we need to put a description for the payment. So I put a backtext here, and we can say something like payment of the user and put current signed in username. So in order to access to the current user, we need to get our current signed in user from our authentication system. In this tutorial, we use the kind authentication system, but if you're using other libraries like Next.auth, in this step, you need to get the current signed in user from the Next.auth session. Here, as I said, we are using the kind authentication system, and since this is a client component, we need to get the user from the use kind browser client. Okay, and from the returning object, we need to grab the user. Let's say const and grab the user from the returning object. Here we can use the user, for example, user dot given name, which is its first name, and then user dot family name, and then for example for buying, and then put the name of the subscription plan dot name. We are accessing the plan through the props of the component. Okay, let's put a period at the end of the description. Okay, now the returning object of this create payment intent is a payment intent, so we need to store it in an object and call it payment intent. Now we need to store the client secret inside the payment intent in a state. So after that, we can put it inside the client secret of the options object of elements provider. So I define a client secret state here, const client secret, and also set client secret, set it to use state, and set the initial value to a empty string. And here we need to define a type for this state. It is going to be a string or null, because the client secret inside the payment intent might be null. And also let's create a loading state, const is loading, and set is loading, set it to a use state with initial value of false. Okay, so it's a boolean. And here in the initiate payment, first we're gonna set the is loading state to true. Okay, and then here after getting the payment intent, we need to set the client secret to the payment intent dot client secret. Okay, and finally we're going to set the is loading state to false. So you might be asking why we have defined the is loading state, because here in the button we are going to set the is loading to the is loading state that we have just created. Okay, so we have a loading state on the button. As you can see here, we have set the client secret with the payment dot client secret. So now we can access the client secret with the client secret state, but it gives us an error, and that's because this client secret might be undefined. So before rendering the elements provider, we need to check if the client secret is available. So here we're going to implement a conditional rendering. We're going to check the client secret, and if the client secret is available, we need to render the elements provided. But before doing that, since the client secret is a string, we need to turn it to a boolean. So I put 2 exclamation mark after that. It turns it to a boolean, and then here we can wrap the whole elements provider inside our conditional rendering. Okay, and as you can see here, the error of the client secret is now gone. Okay, let's save this and let's get back to the browser. If I click on the purchase subscription, you can see we have the loading state, and here we go, we have the payment element of the React Stripe. Awesome. So far we have created a payment intent in our Stripe account. So if I go back to our Stripe dashboard and here click on the transactions, you can see we have a incomplete payment that the description is say payment for the user and the name of the user for buying the standard, which is the name of the plan. So as you can see here, the payment is incomplete. Get back to our application. As I said, the payment is incomplete, which means that we haven't confirmed the payment. So the payment confirm take place when the user put its card information here in this form and then click on the pay. After that, we need to confirm the payment of the user, and the status of the payment in our Stripe dashboard will be turned to succeeded. Okay, now we are going to the next section in which we are going to implement the confirm payment. Okay, so here I go to the checkout form, and here inside the payment form, you can see we have a payment element. Here before implementing the confirm payment, I'm going to put a address element here, which comes from the React Stripe, and inside the address element, we need to specify an options props. Inside the options, we're going to pass an object, and we need to specify the mode here. We can choose between the billing or shipping. For example, we select the shipping. For more details about each mode, you can visit the Stripe documentation, and here we can pass another option. For example, allowed countries, we need to pass a list here, and from the list, for example, we're going to pass US. Okay, so let's save that, and if I get back to the browser, you can see here we have a address element in our payment form. So now let's get back to the VS Code and implement the confirm payment. So here, as you can see, we have a form here. We need to set onSubmit function to a handle submit function. We haven't created this function, so let's get back to the component, and here let's define the handle submit. Let's say const handle submit, set it to a async function. It takes events here, which is going to be a type of form event, and with the generics we need to pass the HTML form element. Okay, here inside the body of the function, the first thing we need to do is to call the event that prevent default. That will prevent the page from reloading. In the next step, we need to set a loading state. So we haven't created a loading state. Let's quickly define a is loading. You can name it is submitting, but let's go ahead with the loading and set loading. We're going to set them to a use state with a false initial value. Now in the pay button, we can set the is loading to is loading state, and here in the cancel button we need to set the is disabled to the is loading as well. So when the is loading is true, cancel button is disabled and we can cancel the process, and also we are turning on the loading state of the button. Okay, get back to our handle submit function. After the event that prevent default, we're going to use a try catch, and inside it, first we're going to set loading to true. Then we need to call the stripe that confirm payment. So if I get back to the purchase plan, the parent component of the checkout form, you can see inside the elements we set the stripe. So in order to access to the stripe object, here we can use the use stripe hook that comes from the React stripe. So here inside the component, we're going to say const stripe and set it to use stripe, and here inside the handle submit function, we're going to call the await stripe that confirm payment, and then here inside it we need to pass the data of our payment form. So how we can access to them, we can use another hook from the React stripe, which is use elements. So I'm going to say const elements and set it to use elements. Okay, now we can access to the data inside the payment form. So here inside the confirm payment configuration object, we're going to pass the elements. We have an error here. That's because the element object might be undefined. So here, before calling the stripe that confirm payment, we can check the availability of the elements and also the stripe object. So here I'm going to say if not elements or not stripe, then we're going to just return from the function. Okay, as you can see, the error on the element is gone, but here we have another error, and that's because we need to pass the confirm params, and inside the confirm params we need to define a return URL. Here we can specify the user profile route, HTTPS localhost 3000 and then /user and then /profile. Okay, as you can see, the errors are gone. So one thing you should remember here is that in order to be able to have access to the elements and stripe, which comes from the use stripes and use elements, we need to wrap this whole component with a elements provider, which we have done in the purchase plan component. Otherwise, we can't access to the use stripe and use element. Okay, so let's get back to the handle submit function. After the try block, we need to put a catch block and get the error, and here console.error with the catched error. And finally, we need to set loading to false. Here we can store the returning object of the confirmed payment to a result object. So I'm going to say const result and store the returning object of the confirmed payment. And after the confirmed payment, we can check for the error here. For example, we can say if result.error, we can toast a error message to user, toast.error, and put the result.error.message. Okay. Otherwise, we can toast a success message to user. So we need to use an else here, and inside the else block you can toast a success message and say, for example, payment successful. So let's save this and get back to the browser. Click on the purchase subscription. Okay, and for the card number, since we are on the test mode, we need to use one of the test cards that are offered by the Stripe itself. So we need to go to the Stripe documentation and search for testing. In the testing section, we can scroll down here and find the test cards. We can use any of these test cards for a test payment. For example, I copy this one. You can see the CVC is any 3 digits and its date is any future date. So I get back to our application and here I paste the card. I'm going to come up with a future date, okay, and put 1, 2, 3 here for the CVC. And here we're going to put our name, and also we need to pass the address here, for example, some street, okay, and we need to pass the city, for example, put a city name, and also choose the state here and put a random zip code. And if I click on the pay here, so as you can see, it tries to redirect us to the /user/profile here. And if I get back to the VS Code, you can see we have HTTPS here. We are on the development mode and we haven't enabled the SSL protocol on this website. So just remove the S here, HTTP, and here we can specify redirected to if required. Okay, so it doesn't actually redirect the user to this route. So if I get back to the browser and refresh the page and go to the subscription, let's refresh the page. If I click on the purchase, and you know what, let's get back to the VS Code and remove the address element from the payment form. Now, without needing to specifying the address, we can make a payment. So I just paste the test card number, put a future date for the expiration date, and 1, 2, 3 for CVC. Click on the pay here. You can see the payment successful message here on the screen. And if I go to the transactions, you can see now the payment is marked with the succeeded label. Okay, as you can see, we have another succeeded payment, and that's because in the meanwhile I paused the video and created some test payments. So these succeeded payments are for those test payments that I've done in the background. So yeah, that's it, the whole process of integrating the Stripe API with our Next.js application. You can see we have successfully made some test payments in our Stripe account. So as I said, if you want to just switch to the live mode, which involves the real money transfer, you can just complete your profile with your financial data and get your API key and replace them in your env file. You don't need to do anything more with your Next.js code. Okay, we're done with the integrating the Stripe API in our Next.js application, but we're not done yet in our subscription page. We need to register the saved purchase plan of the user in our database. But before doing that, let me do a recap for integrating the Stripe API in this section. So I get back to the diagram. First, we need to install the dependencies, and then we need to configure the environment variable. We need to get our API key from our Stripe dashboard. Then we need to create a server action for creating the payment intent. So here we have created a payment.ts file, and inside it we have created a server action for creating the payment intent. So the payment intent actually issues a incompleted payment in our Stripe account with the specified amount and description. Okay, and then we need to go to the front end and create the payment form. We have created the checkout form and put the payment element from the React Stripe inside it. And also keep in mind that wrap your payment form with the elements provider from the Stripe API. You need to pass the Stripe promise, which we have got it from the load Stripe function. We pass the next public Stripe publishable key to it and get the Stripe promise and pass it to the Stripe props of the elements provider. And then we need to pass the client secret. What is this client secret? It comes from the created payment intent object from the create payment intent server action that I've just talked about. Okay, so here in our checkout form, we need to handle form submission. In the handle submit function, we need to get the elements and stripe objects from the use stripe and use elements. As I said, make sure that in the parent component, we wrap this component with a elements provider. Otherwise, we can't have access to the use stripe and use elements. Then with the stripe object that we've got from the use stripe, we can call the confirm payment and pass the element which contains the data of our payment form, and also we need to specify a confirm pass and make sure to set the redirect to if required, so it doesn't actually redirect user to this return URL. And after the confirm payment has done, the status of our payment in our Stripe account will be set to succeeded label, and that's it. This is the whole process of integrating the Stripe API with our Next.js application. Easy as a piece of cake. And as a last step in the subscription page, after the confirm payment was successful, we need to save the data about the purchased subscription for the user in our database. So first we need to create a subscription table in our schema and our database. As you can see, we have already created these subscription plans, which actually keeps the data about our plans. So we're going to add another model, subscriptions. Inside it, we're going to have an ID, which is going to be int, and also add the ID decorator and default decorator and call the auto increment function. No need to explain that. Then we're going to add a payment ID, which is going to be string, and also a created at, which is going to be a datetime, and in the default decorator we're going to call the now function, so we don't need to specify this field when we are inserting a new record to this table. Also, we're going to add an updated at and set its type to datetime, and we just need to mark it with the updated at decorator. So anytime we update a record in this table, this field is set with the updated time. Okay, so let's get back to our diagram tool and add this table in our diagram. Okay, so let me find the diagram. It's here. Let's create another table. Subscriptions. It is going to have an ID, which is going to be int, and it's primary key of the table, and also it has a payment ID, which is going to be a string, and also it has a created at, which is datetime, and also updated at, which is datetime as well. Okay, so this is the subscription table, and here we need to create a one-to-many relationship from the subscription plan to subscription. It means that each subscription has only one subscription plan inside it, but each subscription plan are related to many other subscriptions. So it's a one-to-many relationship. So we need to add a plan ID in the subscriptions table and set its type to int. And then here we're going to say subscriptions.id has a many-to-one relationship with the subscription plan and specify the ID inside the subscription plan. So here, as you can see, we have a one-to-many relationship from the subscription plan to subscriptions, or many-to-one relationship, which we have defined here, from the subscriptions to subscription plan. One subscription plan can be related to many subscriptions, but each subscription is only related with one subscription plan. That's the idea. And then here we need to specify this subscription belong to which user. So we need to specify the user ID inside this table, and here each subscription can only belong to one user, but each user can have multiple subscriptions. So we need to add another relationship here. Subscriptions.user ID has a many-to-one relationship with the user.id. Okay, so let's save this and let's find the subscriptions here. And here, as you can see, one user can have multiple subscriptions, but each subscription can only have one user. That's it, the idea behind the one-to-many relationship from the user to subscription, or many-to-one relationship from subscription to user. So let's implement these relationships in our prisma.schema file. Let's get back to the VS Code here. We're going to add a plan and set its type to subscription plan, and we need to define the add relation decorator, we're going to say that field plan ID, which we haven't defined. So we need to add a plan ID here. Get back here. We're going to say that the plan ID here will refer to the ID inside the subscription plan. Okay, so we need to set the type of the plan ID to int. And if I save that, you can see here in the subscription plan, now we have a list of subscriptions. Okay, let's put the subscriptions with a lowercase s, and then we're going to do the same with the user. So we're going to have a user ID, which its type is going to be int, and then we're going to have a user and set its type to user table, and then we're going to use the at relation, specify the field which is user ID, and we're going to say that this user ID within this table will refer to the ID field inside the user table. And we have an error here, and that's because the type of the user ID inside the user table, I think, is string. Yeah, set the type of the user ID to string as well. Okay, so if I change that, you can see the error is gone. And here in the user model, now we have a subscription. So let's change it with the lowercase s in the beginning. And yeah, we have created the relationship between these three tables. And now we need to just run a migration. So here I'm going to use npx prisma migrate dev and then dash dash name, adding subscription table. So let's run that. Okay, it is done. And now we need to write a server action for inserting a new subscription to the subscription table. So here in the actions, we're going to add another file, subscription.ts. Here we're going to mark this file with use server. Now every function in this file is a server action. Here we're going to export a function, save subscription. It takes a configuration object, and let's define a type for the configuration, which is its parameters. So here first we need to set it to a async function. Okay, and then I'm going to define a type for the parameter. It is a object that has payment ID inside it, which is going to be string. Then it is going to have the plan ID, which is a number, and also a user ID, which is going to be a string. Okay, so if I put the body section of the function, you can see the errors are gone. And now here we can grab the payment ID, plan ID, and also the user ID. Okay, in the body section of the function, we're going to use a try catch block, and inside the try section, we're going to call the Prisma client and call these subscriptions, and from that we're going to call the create function, actually insert a new record into the subscription table. We're going to pass the data here in the configuration object. We're going to specify the payment ID here to the payment ID parameter, and also we need to connect it to the user table. So here we're going to specify the user. Inside that we're going to use the connect API, and for the connect here we're going to specify ID to the user ID. And then here we need to specify the plan, and inside the plan we need to use the connect API and specify the ID to plan ID parameter. Okay, so in this way we are actually inserting a new subscription record in our database and connect it with the user table and also the subscription plan table. After that, we can just return an object that contains a message inside it and say, for example, subscription saved successfully. And then we need to specify the catch block here, get the error, and in case of error, we can return an object with the message inside it. This time the message is e.message. Okay, so we need to set the e with the any. Okay, now let's get back to our checkout form, and after toasting it payment successful to user, we need to call the save subscription server action. So here I'm going to use await and then call the save subscription, and here we need to pass the configuration object. We're going to pass the payment ID to result dot payment intent and then ID. Okay, then we're going to pass the plan ID to props dot plan dot ID. So we don't have the plan inside the props of the component, so let's define it here in the props interface, plan, and set its type to subscription plan that comes from the Prisma client. Okay, and lastly we need to define the user ID and set it to user.id. Obviously, we don't have the user object here, so let's get it from the useKind browser client. So I'm going to say const empty object for now and call the useKind browser client. Obviously, if you are using the next auth, you need to get the user from the use session hook, but here we are using the kind authentication system. So I just grab the user from this hook, and here we can pass the user ID. Okay, in the beginning, let's check if not user, let's return the function. As you can see, the error is now gone. And after toasting a success message to user, we need to redirect the user to the user/profile route. So again, let's have the router const router, set it to use router from the next navigation. It's a client component, and that's why we are using the use router hook here. Router.push to the /user/profile. Okay, so let's make a recap here. After confirm the payment, if there is no error, we save the subscription in our table with the payment ID, plan ID, and the user ID. We toast the success message and then redirect the user to the user/profile. So let's go to the user profile here. It's the user profile page. And here, as you can see, we have a to do here, which says that put the user subscriptions here. First, we need to get the user subscriptions from our database. So here, I'm going to say const user subscriptions and set it to await Prisma client dot subscriptions dot find first, because we are going to use the last subscription of the user. I'm going to tell you why we are using the find first. We don't have the find last in the Prisma, so we just use the find first and then use a order by API. So first we need to set the where API, and inside it we're going to say find the subscriptions that their user ID are equals to the current user db user, which we have here dot id. Okay, and then we need to specify the include API. Actually, inside it we're going to set the plans to true, so it will fetch the subscriptions along with its related subscription plan. And then here we're going to set the order by, which actually sort the result set. We're going to sort them by the created at and use a descending sort. So since the sort is descending, find first is actually converted to a find last. Okay, so it will find the last subscriptions of the user. Now here in the subscription section, we're going to check if the user subscription, so let's just rename it to user subscription, not subscriptions, because it is going to be just one subscription, the last subscription of the user. If it's not undefined, just render a cart component, and inside the cart we're going to use the attribute component. Just like this section, we're going to have a title, which is going to be plan, and the value, which is going to be user subscription dot plan dot name. So that's why we have used the include API in the find first function. Okay, let's just copy that and put another attribute. This time it is going to be price, and the value is going to be subscriptions dot plan dot price. And also let's have another one. This time it is going to be purchased on, and then the value is going to be user subscriptions dot created at dot to local date string. Okay, that's it for the user subscriptions. And since we have used a ternary operator here, we need to specify the component when the user subscriptions is undefined. So we just return a div here. Inside the div, I think we need to put a parenthesis here and remove one parenthesis from here. Okay, the error is gone. And inside the div, we're going to put a p tag and, for example, say no subscription found. Okay, so we just need to put some class names here in the div. We're going to use flex cool, and items sender. Okay, also text sender in the p tag. In the cart here, actually let's turn it to a div And as a last step, we need to go back to the purchase plan. We forgot to pass the plan to the payment form. Set the plan to plan here. You can see in the checkout form, we added the plan in the props of the component, and we have used the ID of the plan in the save subscription plan. So let's save this and get back to the browser. Let's click on the purchase subscription, put our card information, click on the pay. You can see the payment successful message, and here we are redirected to the user profile page, and we have the subscription details page. The plan is standard, we have the price, and we have the purchase date. So yeah, that's it for the subscription section of this project. We have successfully integrated the Stripe API for receiving the online payment in our real estate Next.js project, and we also saved the subscription of the user upon a successful payment. So yeah, that's it for this section of our real estate project tutorial, and I think we almost reached to the end of this tutorial. And if this video was helpful for you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed yet, and hit the bell button to get informed about the next video. Thanks for your all support and have a nice time. Bye bye.